So, continuing with discussing political economy um, within the advanced countries, sorry, we we were discussing about the inflation and how it hurts business. And sure enough, in 1960s and 70s, the British economy was not as healthy as that of other countries like the US, but also like in comparison to Western Europe. Its its economy grew slowly again because partially the government was borrowing a lot of money, so there was less money for individuals and businesses to borrow um, from banks because the government was borrowing all that money, that there wasn't enough money in the system. This led to from 1974 to 79, especially right before Margaret Thatcher came in, a period called Winter of Discontent. When that was that's when the businesses were doing very badly and they wanted people, they wanted more money, they went on strike. Coal miners did so during winter time, which led people to be very, very cold because the coal wasn't being delivered. And it really led to the impression that the left wing party, the Labour, couldn't control the unions. The unions were too powerful, and as such, it brought in Margaret Thatcher. And with Margaret Thatcher, um, I'm going to engage in a different kind of monetary policy, not Keynesianism. Keynesianism. Um, Before we talk about Margaret Thatcher again, Keynesianism is something which sometimes gets practiced in US. In 2008, of course, there was a global recession, and there was something called the stimulus package, in which I think $800 billion were spent to try to keep Wall Street propped up and certain businesses start. Large car manufacturers propped up to keep the people in jobs. It was seen as the best way to keep the economy going. In hindsight, it has been seen as a very smart move. It was started, George Bush was even courting with this idea, which is kind of surprising because he was a Republican president who wouldn't want to do this, but he started this idea of maybe there needs to be a stimulus. And then, really, under Barack Obama, we saw a lot of this. What it basically did is, yeah, it meant some government debt, but it also brought our economy back on track far quicker than countries that practiced what we say austerity, tightening their belt kind of situation. So the UK's recession, the Germany's recession lasted a lot longer than that of US because they didn't engage in Keynesianism. So Keynesianism has even happened in US. A classic example of Keynesianism is to try to get us out of recession would be the New Deal of FDR. So anyway, but Keynesianism ended, as I said, it was started along with collectivism was started to be viewed as a failure, and Margaret Thatcher came in, and her monetary policy was sometimes called monetarism. Yeah, I know it can be kind of confusing to talk about monetarism, but monetarism says, keep the value of money and the idea of keeping inflation low, make that your paramount goal. That should be your central goal. Keeping government expenditure low, not going into debt, not printing too much money. And with inflation being low, businesses will do better. Okay, a lot of people might lose their job, but that's a price that we have to be willing to pay because we want to be fiscally responsible. What that also means was that the government simply did not spend nearly as much on the welfare state. The benefits that workers received when they went on the dole and when they became unemployed was far lower. Um, Not entirely dismantled, but really reallocated, and people were really thrust into rather than settling there unemployed. They just got crummier jobs, low paying jobs. That's what they did in short term. So that was what happened there. This idea that, of trying to protect the value of money, not go into debt, to prevent inflation from having uh, balance your budget by spending less. Now, in the third way again, one of the reasons that labor said we are new labor, we aren't mm, old labor, but we are new labor is we want to engage in continue a lot of the economic policy of the conservatives. We don't want to be so friendly towards the union. We want to help out business. And one of the way we are going to do this is we are going to give our central bank independence, rather than you know mm, rather than us in the sense the government being able to say how much our central bank, how much money to spend and how much money to print. That will be the decision for an independent Bank of England now, of course. um, US as central bank independence, we have something called the Federal Reserve Board. Germany also has um, the same pipe thought bank, which is independent. Uh, and this, the goal is to keep inflation low. Do not make that a political decision where governments sometimes go into debt simply to provide social services to people who might then vote for them, to give them rewards. Instead, they say that decisions shouldn't be made politically. It should be made by economists who are deaf to the cries of poor. So the British have done that. Now they have central bank independence, and that was instituted even by the parties in the left, which is not what you would expect. And so that's when they were balanced budget. So they still acted kind of socialist in the sense that they didn't cut taxes, but instead of those times when the times were good, then they expanded some of the public sectors, spending more on teachers and healthcare and training internships for the young. But that's just kind of a look at different kinds of monetary policy. You got one where government is heavily involved in the economy, with Keynesianism to being much less involved in monetary uh, policy and letting an independent central bank to determine economic policy. So that's the way which the monetary policy in UK evolved over the times. Well, what are the results of this monetary policy? What has happened with British starting off um, laissez-faire, but then becoming much more collectivist? Well, in terms of society, what we see in the UK, it's not very egalitarian society. It's not a very egalitarian society. the top 25% of the country has about 75% of the wealth, which is puts it among one of the less equal countries in the world. Certainly not the most unequal countries, but one of the less equal countries in the world. And there is a measure also for income inequality called Gini coefficient. Mm, If you had perfect, if everybody was earning the same amount, you would be at zero. I mean, everybody makes the same. If you have just tremendous inequalities where some people are making very tiny group of people is making a lot of money and most of the people are very little money, then your Gini coefficient would be about 100%. So for Gini coefficient, you want to be low if you want income equality. So, and the British Gini coefficient is at 32%, but by comparison, the US is at 47. So, income equality is much higher in the US, and in fact, the British are closer actually to Sweden. They are only 8 points away from Sweden, whereas they are about 15 points away from US. So, income equality that exists in the UK, it has gone down, which is quite surprising considering that they had, an aristocratic class, yet a lot of people who are still benefited on some old money. Another thing is that UK has one of the highest household poverty rates in Europe at at 17% uh, in UK. In many other countries are around like France and Germany are about 7 to 8%, but it's gone down from 21% of 1990s. So again, during the enterprise culture, despite the economy doing well, the British did tolerate a lot of unemployment and a lot of poverty and for a European sense. In the European sense, they are a country that tolerates this a lot more. Again, not quite as tolerant as US, but more tolerant of having poor people than say Germany, certainly Sweden, when they provide welfare. What they do is called mean tested. Uh, a mean tested simply means they look at the means of an individual, uh, look at how much money an individual is making, and if you are poor, then uh, you get welfare benefits. The poorest are going to receive money, but there is not benefits for everybody. You have to be below the mean. We are going to see in Sweden they have universal benefits where even rich people, if they want to, can go and get free healthcare. Now they are probably choose to go to a private doctor, but if they want, they could go and sit with everybody else in a public clinic and wait their turn in line. It's there for everybody. In exception of that is of course going to be the national health care in UK, health services in UK. Even though they have this unequal society, when it comes to this, there is an exception where they do have a universal health care, which actually even got a funding boost during the third wave. Now, for the youth, there is not much welfare provided, but they do provide a lot of training. So the government is little bit of active. It does say, okay, you're not just on your own, right? But if you are unemployed, you can access more unemployment benefit if you apply to be trained, and the government will foot that bill. If you are a coal miner and there is not a lot of coal mines out there anymore, we will retrain you to become an air conditioner technician or something like that where there are jobs.